So as you can see, summer is well and truly here in West Wales. It's really sunny here today, everything's growing, and I haven't uploaded for ages, it feels like. And I do apologise about that, but everything's just gone a bit hectic. I had a lot of assessments in school before half term, and now I've just been a bit busy, so I'm getting back on it now. And there'll be this video out today, and then next Monday there'll be another video out as well. And then hopefully I can keep this up again like I used to. So today's video is going to be a bit about harvest. I know a lot of it is about planting my videos and not harvest the greenhouse, even though that is here. I'm going to be speaking about how when you should harvest potatoes, which is something that I used to struggle with myself, because there's always the thing where sort of main crops you let die down a bit to die, and then the first earlies, I used to think that they were all, you just let them die down, whereas that just lets everything start to eat them with first and second earlies. So I'm going to be speaking about the ways that you can, or the times that you can harvest your potatoes for the best crop and the least eaten crop, because inevitably if you leave your potatoes in the ground for too long, then they will get eaten. Before this video gets started, please make sure you go down below, hit the subscribe button as well as the little bell icon next to it to make sure you're notified next time I upload a new video. So the varieties that I'm growing this year is, the first earlies are Rocket, which I thought seemed to be quite good when I was in the garden centre picking them. And the second earlies I'm growing are Charlotte, and then the main crops I'm growing are Sarpamira, but I haven't actually planted the Sarpamira yet, which I need to do. And that's something that I've realised this year, is we had such an awful spring of weather. It was very wet and cold at the same time. The seedlings just didn't take off, and I know potatoes, you know, put seed potato in, they grow. But everything, even all the hedgerows, if you look, is probably a month, maybe even 2 months later in some places than it was at this time last year, because this time last year we had the opposite, where we had a really warm spring up to about June, about this time, and then it started to go a bit downhill, where it started to get a bit cooler, more thunderstorms, things like that. But today I'm going to be harvesting first earlies, which are my Rocket, as I said, but this is the same for second earlies and first earlies. But I'll just speak a bit first about when to harvest each different type of potato. So as you will know, or as you know from my talking today, there's 3 different types of potatoes you can get. There's the first earlies, the smaller ones tend to be like salad or new potatoes. The second earlies, which are a bit in between, a bit more versatile. And then there's the main crops, which are like the big potatoes, the proper potatoes. I mean, they're all proper potatoes, but you know, like the proper big potatoes. And first and second earlies, you shouldn't let the plant completely die down before harvesting. What you should do is you should wait until there's a change in the colour of the leaf. The leaves will start to go a paler green, or even yellow in my case. And once they start to go paler, that's your time to pick them, because then there'll be the least insect damage and the least insects will have eaten them. Whereas if you leave first and second earlies to completely die back, like you would main crops, then you'll probably get to the potatoes and there'll be worms in them, there'll be slugs that'll probably have started to eat them, and it's just not a very nice sight, especially when you've put all that work in to growing them. As you may have heard me mention, main crops then, you let them completely die back. So once the stems have all gone yellow and sort of flopped to the floor, or gone crispy, then is your time to pick them. And if they're growing in the ground, or in a bucket probably, you can even leave them in a bit longer, the main crops. They tend to store quite well, they're a bit thicker skinned, and they're not as rushed to be harvested when they're ready, because some of them will get eaten obviously, because they'll just be left in the ground, but less of them will be compared to the other ones. And I just tend to pick them as soon as the stems have flopped and gone yellow, or crispy and dried out, because then you know they're ready. Whereas if you do want to store them in the ground, you can, or you can alternatively make, I've actually done this myself, but I've seen other people do it in books, is you get sort of a heap of like straw, put the potatoes on the straw, put more straw on top, and then cover it with mud or earth or soil, whatever you want to call it. And that is another way of storing them in the ground. But I won't get onto that today because I haven't done it myself. And obviously I'm growing them in buckets, which is why I've got them in a wheelbarrow. But if you're not growing them in buckets and they're in the ground, this rule still applies about having the yellowing stems. And you can see the stems here actually have gone yellow, they've gone paler. And even the green bits have gone pale, which is what I said. So ideally, you wouldn't let it get to this point too much. You can, like I have, but if you want the best chance of them not being eaten, than go when they're still green, but very, very pale green. So what I'm going to start with is you get your secateurs, and you do this even with the dried stems on main crop. It just depends on the state of the stem. And what I do is I cut them at the base of the bucket, or at the soil level in the bucket. And you can leave the stems there and just pull it out of the bucket. But I like to empty all the hay or mulch off the top, take the stems out, and then I tip the whole bucket out into another wheelbarrow. And obviously all these bits can go into the compost bin. So I take all the hay mulch out. And hay is a really good resource in the garden, which I think I'll be making a video on soon as well. So you should grab all the stems and give these a good cut. These aren't very good secateurs that I've got here, but it doesn't matter too much as long as they're cut. So put these in there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get my other wheelbarrow, and then I'll tip these into there. I'm also going to get some gloves on because this can get messy. So I fetched my other wheelbarrow now, and I've also got a wooden trug and my gloves. The wooden trug is to put the harvested good potatoes in, the wheelbarrow is to tip the bucket into, and the gloves are just to keep my hands a bit cleaner. So I'm just going to get my gloves on before we get started so I don't get muddy hands when I touch the mud. And you can do this bare hand obviously. And if you don't have a wheelbarrow to tip the buckets out into, if you are using a bucket that you're growing your potatoes in, then you could just put a tarpaulin down or something like that, or even old compost bags, just lay them on the ground. There's no need to buy new things, you can reuse old things easily enough. So I'll put this on the floor where I'm going to put my nice potatoes, and I'm going to grab this bucket over here now. So now I'm just going to bring the camera around, and then I'll tip them out so you can see the harvest. This is either going to be really good and a really good video with loads of potatoes, or it's going to be a funny video because there's going to be tiny marble-sized potatoes, but who knows. So here we are, let's do the big reveal and tip this out. Oh, I can see some potatoes already, they're quite small, but not too bad. It's quite dry, that's something maybe I could have done better, is to use either better compost, or I could have maybe watered it a little bit more, but I tried to not do that because then it can get a bit too much and I use a lot of water. So here's another one. At least none of them have been eaten so far, even though they're small. So these are very, very small potatoes actually. It's quite funny, but obviously it's all to do with the weather and everything like that. It's not only our control, so I think on this channel I need to show more of not only the good things that happen, but the bad things, because not everything goes right all the time. But these aren't too bad, they're good new potatoes, they're fine. And rocket isn't a huge variety anyway. But these will be doing just fine for dinner. That's a whopper, look how big that one is. I actually think this is an alright harvest. I didn't think it was at the start, but it's actually not doing too bad. And as you can see, the soil that it's growing in is very, very dry. But I've still gotten an alright harvest. It's not too bad. There's the seed potato there. Make sure you don't eat that. Mine is rotten here, so you can tell it's a seed potato, but sometimes you can't tell, and they'll just not probably be very nice to eat. Now look at that. That's one bucket and we're getting an alright harvest already. I'm only picking one bucket today because then we can just pick them when we need from the other buckets. Considering how bad of a spring we've had, these are actually quite good potatoes. That's what you've got to make sure, is you've got to run your hands through and make sure there aren't any hiding in the soil, which I don't think there are. There, so that's what a harvest we've got from one bucket, which isn't great. It's 3 seed potatoes worth, but it's not the worst harvest I've ever had. A bucket this size with those potatoes is actually awful for us, but then again, it has been a funny year, as I said, with the weather, so hopefully they'll be fine and we can mash them up for dinner, because they're quite small. But that's fine, I'm happy with that, and any harvest is a harvest. You've got to remember that. Not every harvest is going to be perfect, and you've just got to enjoy the ones that you do get. So I've harvested them now, as you saw. They were quite small and it was a fairly small harvest, but it's fine, and any harvest is a harvest, as I said previously. But now I'm going to speak about what you can do if you've grown them in buckets, but if you've grown them in the ground, this is a bit irrelevant for you. What you can do with the soil out of the buckets next. But I'll also briefly touch on, for if you've grown it in the soil, what you can do with the soil after potatoes. So I obviously used some good potting compost in this to grow potatoes because they are fairly hungry plants. So I don't really want to just get rid of this soil. So I can either use it, because it still has nutrients and organic matter in it, I can either use it to mulch the soil, to feed the soil mid-year, because it's mid-year and mid-growing season. I could put it on top of maybe a bed there or a flower bed, or alternatively, which is what I'm going to be doing with this stuff, you can add it to your compost, just like all of the unbroken down material there. You can put it in the compost pile, and this will add a brown material to your compost, which will stop the green materials going sludgy, and it will also add a lot of microorganisms and bacteria that are needed in the composting process. So this will help your compost, used compost will help your compost to compost much quicker and to be better compost in the end. But alternatively, you can, as I said, just put it like this. Just put it around your plants to feed them midsummer, but I'm going to be putting this in compost, as I just said. And one of the wonderful benefits of harvesting one bucket at a time, which means, you know, I just mentioned that the soil was a bit dry in that one. What that then means is that I can adapt how I'm watering the other ones. So I've still got 2 first early buckets growing, and they're still growing because they've still got a bit of green in them. So that means, because I've learnt from that one is a bit dry, whilst they are still growing and bulking up, I can give them some really good watering tonight, and then they'll grow a bit bigger and a bit more, hopefully. Because with potatoes, they put most of their growth on in the last few weeks of their life, or maybe even last week of their life, because if you think about it, the plants, they die down, and they're a bit like a dahlia, say, where when they die down, they put all of their energy into their tubers or their bulbs or whatever you want to call them, for their winter or until they next grow. So really, what you're doing is you're watering them to help them bulk up, and then you're just picking those tubers. So as I said earlier on in the video, first and second earlies are ready when they start to go a bit more pale or less green and more yellow than they were when they were growing. And you may think, what were they like when they're growing? Because you might forget. Well, what you can do is you can look at your ones that are already growing, even though they're different varieties, they'll be very similar. And here I've got my Charlotte second earlies, and you can see that they're quite a deep green. So what you can do is just make sure when they're less of a deep green or more of a yellow, that's when you pick them. So as I said, just go back and look at the ones that are already growing or still growing and see what they're like, and then compare them, and when they're a lot paler, then you can pick them. That's for first and second earlies, but for the main crops, they want to be more of a yellow, a flopped thing, and more of sort of a straw colour, maybe a crispy thing, a bit like this hay here. The stems should look like that when they're ready, and then you just pick them or leave them and store them in the ground. So that's all that I have for you in today's episode. It's very sunny here today, so that's why I'm so pale and shiny. But yeah, that's all I've got today. I hope you really did enjoy, and I hope you learnt something, because I know I really used to struggle when I first started growing vegetables more what or when you should actually harvest potatoes, because some said you let them completely die down, some didn't, and then it got confusing. And I've been growing potatoes as well ever since I was a really young boy in my family garden here, or in buckets and grow bags and things like that. Yeah, I think it's a really staple part of any vegetable garden because it's just such a classic vegetable to grow, isn't it? And it's not too high maintenance, they're not too difficult to grow. You just plonk a seed potato in, they grow. Whether you've got a big harvest or not, no one really cares because they're just so enjoyable to pick from the bucket, put in a trug and then eat them in the evening. And they're often so much more rich in flavour than shop bought. They're less watery normally. They've got a bit more of an earthy taste normally, especially when you pick them straight from the garden, straight to the dinner table. But anyway, I hope you learnt something. Please make sure you like, comment and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.